appreciate it. So what inspired me to do a speech last week, we all had a conversation with some fellow Toastmasters, and Justin, one of our members, related a story that's relatable to what's going on today in society in terms of police brutality. And we were also talking about a book that we had just read, and Miguel gave an honest opinion. He said, you know, I can't relate to any of these issues, not because I don't care for them, but because I'm just really focused on my job and, you know, other current events in my personal life. So it's very hard for me to focus on these things. And it got me thinking, and I wanted to put an analogy together. So I thought about this documentary that I saw. It's called Wagon Wheel from the 30 Money series on the Netflix series. So this documentary is about the Wells Fargo scandal, and I want to talk about the leadership that they used, because it's going to tie in together, and you'll see in the end. Most of you might be familiar with different styles of leadership, such as a democratic leader or a authoritarian type of leader. But the type of leadership that Wells Fargo tried to implement was a affiliative type of leadership. And it's personally my favorite style of leadership because it requires you to form bonds. Now, in order for a company to form bonds, they have to form trust, and it's internal trust with the employees. The reason why that's important is because if the employees buy into the product, then they're no longer selling a product. They're speaking from their genuine heart. There's a big difference in that. But as I got to see later on in the documentary, this trust that was created was fake, and I'll touch into that. But it was based on something that Wells Fargo was very proud of, and they labeled cross-selling. Now, when I finish my speech, before I start getting into cross-selling, I want to ask you guys what you picture, form an image in your head of what you picture a criminal to be. And then in the end, I want to ask you the same question and see if you have the same image. Now, this Wells Fargo scandal resonates with me because I have a personal friend named Myra, who in 2007, she worked for Wells Fargo, and she was very excited to work for this company. And if you guys have any friends that work for Wells Fargo, then they probably persuaded you to leave your financial institution and switch to Wells Fargo. And she persuaded me. I ended up switching from Bank of America, whom I had been with since I was in 3rd grade, to Wells Fargo. After watching this documentary, I started to realize why she did that. One of the employees, his name is Killian Collin. He is a refugee from Syria, and he relays how proud he was to work for such a company that hired immigrants, you know? Then you have an employee who chose to remain anonymous, and he relayed the same thing, but he also added on to it. He said, women were leaders in this organization. You had Asians, you had Blacks, you had Latinos who were in management positions. So right there, you were developing an internal trust within the organization. Yesenia references what they referred to as the code of conduct, which was employees should not sell accounts to customers without their authorization. And she felt like, wow, this is very genuine, you know, we shouldn't do that. Emily Glazier, a journalist for the Wall Street Journal, mentioned how during the recession, Wells Fargo was at the peak of their, was like the poster child or the golden child, as she refers to it, because they didn't have any, what she refers to as financial settlements. And apparently this is what separated them from banks such as JP Morgan, Citigroup, or Bank of America, because a financial settlement is an essential, basically like a prenup with your customer, and Wells Fargo wasn't having these. So that's how they formed trust with their customers. And their employees really believed in the diverse environment that they were working in, and they were attracting diverse customers. So towards the end of the documentary, the narrative switches, and it's interesting how the perspective that the management or the leadership relayed to their employees was different from reality. Yesenia started noticing how fake accounts were being sold to customers without their consent, and she didn't understand why. She took it to management's attention. They told her to focus on her own goals. One of the anonymous characters relays how there was a lot of fear going on because what he refers to as the regional presidents, he labels them demigods because they went into stores and terminated regional managers, let go of managers on the spot if they were not meeting goals. He also terminated stores. So people started having a fear of losing their job, and they started lying to customers about opening up fake accounts. Now, the reason why I mentioned the Wall Street Journal journalist is because this cross-selling that they were doing, Wells Fargo was the only institution that made that public in the records. Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan didn't make this public. So the financial investors were like, well, if Wells Fargo has customers who are putting in their mortgage along with their savings and into their checking account, then their customers must trust Wells Fargo. So that means that there's distrust with these other companies, right? The CFO, his name is Herbert Atkins. He basically said that cross-selling was the foundation of what they stood for. So towards the end, you start to see that Yesenia, she made a conclusion. She was from St. Helen, and she basically said, if my coworkers sell eight accounts a day, which was their daily goal, then within 125 days, all the 5,000 citizens or residents of St. Helen are going to have a Wells Fargo account. So what's going to happen then? The pressure was still going to be on to sell an additional account, a savings account. So the target of these the target of the employees was usually immigrants that were non-English speaking and didn't know what they were signing, and the majority of them were Latinos because that's the majority of immigrants. So the question that I want to ask is, were the people doing this, or were they put in a situation where they had to do this due to the policies that were set in place, right? So I want to quote a couple of CEOs and journalists that actually has something to say toward these issues. So here are some quotes from Elizabeth Warren. She was cross-examining John Stumpf. He was a CEO at the time of Wells Fargo. And she basically asked him the following question. She said, cross-selling is about pumping up your Wells Fargo stock, isn't it? And he replied that it's about deepening relationships. But then she went into him and she reminded him that Stumpf bragged about setting a record high of 5.98 in products per household. She reminded him that this meant his share price went up about $30, and that meant a $200 million profit for Stumpf. And it was all fake because these were fake accounts. It's not like they were generating money. So it was basically creating inflation for the economy. So how did the media see it? Jon Stewart, a New York Times columnist, said the following: people do these things. People do these bad things. Individuals do the bad things. The shareholders didn't do this. The bank didn't do this. In abstract, um, as he puts it. Um, Imagine being an employee of Wells Fargo and basically being labeled a bad guy because you're the one that was selling fake accounts, but nobody knows why you were doing this. Maybe you just needed to hold on to your job because that's the only job you can hold on to. So again, the leadership that was put in place. In the end, 5,000 plus employees lost their job. And I asked myself, were these 5,000 employees, did they lose their job because they couldn't lie properly, or maybe, maybe they didn't show up to work on time? But one of the NBC anchors asked a very interesting question. He said, if 5,300 employees cross that moral line, is that a Wells Fargo issue or is that a human issue? Meaning they had a moral standard that they couldn't meet these goals, and maybe there was a reason for it. So we glamorize people like John Stumpf because he talks about stocks and all this and making money, and that's great. But we get lost on issues that are going on in real life. And it's not our fault. Money is meant to survive. It's our means of survival. But we're put in these situations by our leaders, and then we lose focus on, someone like Justin who was trying to better his life, but he's looked at as a bad guy. But I want to ask you guys, who's the real bad guy? And how can we stop being robots in the physical form and not recognize this? Thank you.